Welcome, everyone. We'll give it just a minute for everyone to join us. Thank you for being with us today. Welcome as you come in, as everyone comes in. We're just going to give it a minute as I see our participants number ticking up. All right. Oh, still ticking up. We'll just give it another few seconds here. Great. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Allie Cobb, and I'm the Vice President of Development for the Atlanta Women's Foundation. Thank you for joining us for our Women's History Month webinar, Breaking Barriers, Breaking Biases. For today's webinar, we've invited a few of our grantee partners to share the challenges their clients face because of bias, how bias affects the impact of their services, and the challenges and opportunities going forward. We'll jump into this conversation in just a minute, but first I'd like to share a little more information on the Atlanta Women's Foundation. Our mission is to be a catalyst for change in the lives of women and girls. We strive to ensure that women and girls living in Metro Atlanta thrive. We deliver our mission through strategic grant making, community engagement opportunities, and by leveraging research and public events to connect the need with resources in our community. Our clients are local grassroots nonprofits, whom we call our grantee partners, that are located right here in Metro Atlanta. Our grantee partners provide direct services to women and girls, such as housing, mental health services, job training, life skills training, education, advocacy, and much more. AWF supports our grantee partners by providing funding, resources, and evaluation assistance. We also build awareness and support through our issue area reports and research on the barriers affecting women and girls living in poverty. And we develop leaders through our community impact programs like Inspire Atlanta. I hope you'll consider giving a donation today in honor of Women's History Month, or you may even consider beginning a monthly gift to AWF. All gifts make a difference and make our work possible. You can give online and learn more about the Atlanta Women's Foundation at atlantawomen.org. Now it is my pleasure at this time to introduce our moderator, Julie Finn. Julie is a sought-after speaker, executive coach, and women's leadership expert. She is on a mission to inspire, engage, and encourage professional women to excel as leaders and entrepreneurs without burning out. She is chief mentor at the Working Mothers Mentor, where she supports high-achieving women as they learn to play big and make bold moves while thriving in their full, balanced lives. She is also a graduate of our inaugural Inspire Atlanta class of 2018. Julie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Allie. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you guys for taking your time to learn more about how bias affects the lives of women and girls. I think for a lot of us, we understand the effects of biases in our workplaces. We think about things like women not getting paid the same. We think about women's voices being silenced in meetings or women being passed over for promotion, but I think we don't really understand the myriad ways that bias affects the lives of women and girls. And so I'm so honored to be here with this esteemed panel of leaders to help us unpack these issues and understand. I want to start by having each person here introduce herself, and I'm going to start with you, Cheryl. If you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and your organization.
Well, thank you, Julie. As she mentioned, my name is Cheryl Carter, and I am the Director of Programs for the Drake House. And the Drake House is a nonprofit organization that serves mothers experiencing homelessness and their school-aged children located in North Fulton County. I have the privilege of supporting the work of a wonderful team of human service professionals and volunteers who serve as coaches and advocates to our program participants with the goal of ensuring that each participant we serve in our program will acquire the resources, skill sets, and mindsets necessary to attain and preserve their economic independence. We have a very unique approach. Our approach to working with clients is participant-directed one-on-one coaching. The coaching model that we use is informed by brain science. Specifically, this coaching model addresses the impact of toxic stress on our participants and how that stress affects their decision-making and their sense of self. Utilizing coaching, a bridge tool to track progression over time, goal setting and recognition, we help participants build healthy executive functioning skills for the complex task of moving out of poverty and preparing to successfully acquire and sustain housing. The work is done through 3 distinct programs. First, our Drake House, which is our 180-day crisis housing program. Secondly, we have the Drake Village, our 2-year transitional housing program. And last, our Professional Women's Career Network that we affectionately refer to as PWCN, wherein we continue to support our transitioned residents in their path to upward career mobility. We have a plethora of supportive services and resources, such as our over 50 employment and community partners, volunteers who support our direct work with clients and our operations, life skills programming, an after-school program, teen programming, and a food pantry. The program and the work that we do is something that every person in our organization is passionate about, and we're grateful for the opportunity to share that passion with you all today, and grateful for the AWF's support of our organization. On a personal note, I have been in nonprofit management for over 35 years and switched from management to direct service and have not looked back, and I am honored every day to do this work. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate you and the work that you're doing. Thank you for your introduction. Over to you, Barbara.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Julie. Thank you to everyone who's listening with us today. Glad to be here. I'm with the Women's Resource Center. I serve as the Housing Services Director. The Women's Resource Center provides a number of supportive services and also emergency refuge for survivors of domestic violence, with the overall goal of helping people achieve ultimately, our goal really is to help people realize our highest vision of themselves, whatever that looks like for them. So to clarify that vision and then to reach for that vision. And on a personal note, I am going to be doing the Peachtree Road Race for the 11th time this year.
Wow, that's fantastic, Barbara. And just FYI, your sound did cut out just a little bit there. So as we go through, we'll let you know if we have any challenges with that, okay?
Sure, I'm sorry about that. We're having a little bit of trouble with the internet today.
Yeah,
but
no worries.
Yeah.
No worries. Thank you so much. I'm going to kick it over to you, please, Rashidah.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone joining us today. I'm so very excited to be here. My name is Rashida Jones. I serve as the Director of Recruitment and Admissions for Year Up Greater Atlanta. Year Up is a national workforce development nonprofit with 20 years of experience in connecting young adults with meaningful careers at top companies. We are committed to ensuring equitable access to economic opportunity, education, and justice for the young adults that we serve. Earlier this year, we did a randomized controlled trial that showed that Year Up has increased earnings by an average of $8,000 per year for the 4 years post-program for the young adults in our program. We are just so excited about our outcomes, and I'm excited to share more about the work that we do here in Atlanta and how AWF has inspired our work and contributed to our success. One fun fact about me is that I'm a mom of 2 beautiful girls and a wife to an amazing husband. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rashidah. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Sarah.
Thank you, Julie. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah White. I am the Director of the Clayton Family Advocacy Office, and I'm a senior attorney in the South Fulton County and Clayton County Office of Atlanta Legal Aid Society. We provide free legal services to qualified individuals in civil cases in the Atlanta area. In the case of my project, this entails providing services to survivors of family violence, sexual assault, and child abuse. Those services include legal assistance and advice, and also direct representation in not only protective orders and related family law cases like divorce and custody cases, but also related housing cases, evictions, cases related to public benefits, certain immigration cases, and also education matters. We also have on staff multiple navigators that help clients access supportive services, such as those provided by our partners on the call here, for example. And finally, our organization does participate in partnerships with courts and other community organizations to educate the public about their rights and what solutions might be available to them when they are in crisis.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, ladies, for the work that you do. We have such a diverse set of organizations represented here, so I'm really excited to dive in. So I want to start by setting the stage. I want to help our listeners understand how bias in the lives of women and girls actually drove them to need your services. So I want to start by understanding what their lives look like before they come to you. So Sarah, I'm going to kick it back to you, and I want to start to understand the effect of bias in the lives of the women and girls that you serve before they come to you, and how those biases in many ways have impacted them in a way that has necessitated their need for your services.
Sure. So folks who seek our or who receive our services have qualified, and one of the qualifiers is income-based. So the most kind of direct and immediate need that all of my clients have is money. So of course, I'm going to start by talking about the pay gap a little bit and reminding us what that means for women in particular. The majority of my clients are actually women of color. So white women do earn 79 cents on the dollar compared to white men. But that figure is different for example, Black women earn 64 cents on the dollar compared to white men, and Hispanic women earn 57 cents on the dollar statistically. So the effects, of course, are greater as we see people at the intersection of multiple demographics. On top of that, I would say that my clients, being predominantly women, are kind of expected to find solutions to impossible problems. So my clients tend to be expected to take care of their families despite having fewer resources than other folks in their lives, especially the men who were previously in their lives in most cases. But at the same time, they tend to be judged or even punished in some way for seeking help, for example, via public benefits. There is significant stigma in many circles associated with seeking assistance, such as food stamps or other benefits. For those who are able to qualify for housing benefits, landlords often don't want to rent to them, sometimes for better reasons related to the rules, but often more related to the stigma, as I was talking about. I've had landlords say that to my face about how they feel about people who are receiving government benefits of any kind. And in custody cases, the need for public benefits might be used against my clients, even though that need is a direct result of this pay gap and also of the fact that they have been experiencing and surviving domestic violence. And then finally, I would say my clients are all survivors of some kind of family violence or abuse, and they're assumed to fit a certain personality, let me say, not necessarily a certain demographic, although that may come to mind for some folks too. But I think everybody wants to believe that domestic violence is a problem that's, over there, right? That's associated with a different kind of person than me. So they're assumed to have somehow brought it on themselves, whether it's they stayed too long or they provoked it in some way. And so that's really what I'm talking about when I say that I think my clients are expected to find solutions to impossible problems that they didn't even create.
That's really helpful and illuminating. And I think sort of related to that would be how bias, and we can go deeper into how it specifically affects housing. So Barbara, maybe you can jump in there and help us understand how you've seen the effects of bias affect people's ability to have stable and secure housing.
Absolutely. So following up on Sarah's points, dealing with some of those impossible problems, the women are impacted by insurmountable systems. So for example, if you have one false move, for example, with regard to late payments or evictions, or if you're having difficulty bridging this gap of I'm not earning enough money because I'm a woman, because I don't have the same opportunities that maybe other people might have, then the challenge is going to be that you're not going to be able to find housing that's affordable for you. You're also not going to be able to find people who are willing to rent to you for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's because of language, sometimes it's because of culture, sometimes it's because you don't fit into a certain kind of a look that a person is expected to have. Sometimes it's also true that for families who have too many children, housing is a challenge. Another issue is if you don't have a car, transportation can be a significant barrier for housing as well as for employment. And one of the biggest challenges for survivors of domestic violence who are also subjected to financial abuse is that if the person who caused harm also ruined your credit or made it difficult for you to maintain your financial stability, then again, that's going to be another significant barrier for you in terms of obtaining housing. So that's one of the things that survivors are definitely struggling with.
That's really helpful. And I think if we sort of now kind of broaden it out a little bit and think beyond housing, Cheryl, can you jump in here and help us understand other ways in which bias has affected the lives of the women and girls that you serve that drove their initial need for your support?
Yeah, I first want to say that the most striking disparity can be found among African Americans who represent 13% of the general population, but account for 39% of the people experiencing homelessness. And more than 50% of those homeless families are with children. And I have not seen this imbalance change over time since I have been in this field. I think that the disproportionality in homelessness is a byproduct of systemic inequity. The lingering effects of racism continue to perpetuate the disparities in critical areas that impacts the rates of homelessness. And that also then leads to other issues, that mental health issues, transportation issues, all of those other things that are related to poverty. So, you know, poverty is a strong predictor of homelessness.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's really helpful. And I think if we sort of connect the dots and draw a line back, it seems like one of the important levers that we have and tools we have will be around employment and access to financial resources, financial independence. So Rashidah, if you can, again, I want to stay with the same question. I want to understand how bias has affected the lives of the women and girls that you serve before they come to you, and how that bias impacted them in a way that drove their need for your services.
Yeah, thank you very much. So everyone that my peers have spoke on really highlights the opportunity divide. So that's what we call it at Year Up. That divide that is keeping the young adults that we serve from getting access to career and stability, essentially. And divide looks different. That opportunity divide looks different for everyone, right? So for the young woman we serve prior to coming to the program, it may be many of the things that were already mentioned: access to childcare. So not being able to have access to childcare and have a child, you know, somewhere where they can go safely and the parent being able to go to work. Transportation, in the workplace, when looking at the employment structure, many of the women we serve come from, you know, places where they're not able to move up. So they have jobs, they're working in maybe restaurant industries, they're working in retail, they're working in spaces that are paying them minimum wage, and then they have all these other obstacles to address, whether it's food, housing. So these things are impacting them career-wise, because they're not able to get out of that circle, that rut where I'm able to get these things stable so I can focus on getting out of a job and into a meaningful career. So the biases that come up is like, people don't think I can do it. They say I can't do it because I have all these other things going on. They say I can't do it because I don't have anyone to watch my child, or because I'm only working in this space and I don't have the skills, I don't have the education. So those biases, it's a misconception of because you have these things happening to you, you can't get out of the situations that you're in. And that's where we help to really break the bias when they come to Year. We say, that's not who you are. That may be your situation, but that's just a part of the thing that you're going through right now. And how can we get you out of this opportunity divide so that you can get into a meaningful and impactful career that can change your life and then address all of those other things that you have going on, whether it's housing, whether it's childcare, whether it's transportation.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And thank you guys for helping us sort of lay the groundwork. I want to ask a question that may, in some eyes, be seen as sort of provocative, but I think is important to help us to sort of tease out. And that's the following. For a lot of these situations, a lot of the negative outcomes we're talking about, some people would argue that there are other things that are driving those negative outcomes, and it's not necessarily a result of bias. And so one of the things I want to put a spotlight on in this conversation, I think particularly because a lot of people don't have the sort of front row seat that you have to the challenges that are a result of bias. I'd love to put some kind of structure around this so that people can understand where negative outcomes are not just because of bad choices or things that often people attribute negative outcomes to, but are actually the effect of both personal biases, so individual biases that people encounter, and also systemic biases. So I want to start to unpack that a little bit so that we can understand that, yes, for some people, there are issues. Obviously, there are always going to be issues around choices, responsibility, things like that. But beyond that, that people are in this broader system where there are biases that they encounter from a systemic standpoint and also from the standpoint of individuals that they encounter. So Cheryl, I see you shaking your head. So I'm going to ask you to jump in first there. So how can we help people understand where negative outcomes are not simply the result of things like bad choices, but are really the result of biases? How do we tease that out? And how can we put flesh around that in a way that people can understand it?
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why we're here, because we are looking for a deeper understanding in the connection between structural racism and racial disparities among homeless populations. We first need to have a basic understanding of how to comprehend all of the data and the information that is available to us, and making progress to understanding in these kind of forums, having open communication and conversations about some of the things that we see in our work. We also need to work as a community on developing actionable procedures and addressing those biases in the programming, including ensuring that our community systems do not replicate what is already existing. So if Rashidah and I have the same programming and we're doing the same thing, we should be working together to be able to serve more people. And then I think also having a qualitative analysis and elevating the people who are experiencing these things so that we can hear their voices, so they can share their experiences, their specific experiences, so that we can figure out how to best serve them and how to best really figure out where these biases or these, these stigmas are coming from, the root cause of those things.
Thank you, Cheryl. And Barbara, I'm going to ask you, just heads up, panelists, I'm going to ask everybody to chime in on this because I think this is a really important question. I think this is where a lot of people get stuck, is they see the problem. It's not hard for a lot of people to see the problem, but it's hard to understand the drivers, what's actually underneath it. So again, the question to you, Barbara, would be, how do we help people understand that some of the drivers of these negative outcomes are not just sort of bad choices or personal responsibility, that there really are biases that are directly impacting people's lives? Can you give us any examples or stories or things in your work that would help us to kind of illuminate that?
Sure, I do have some thoughts about that. Thank you, Julie. I wanted to go back to Sarah's language earlier about, requiring survivors to solve impossible problems. And thinking more about that, this is really about the fact that there are not choices. So we're saying that survivors are making poor choices. They don't have any choices. That's really what the bias and the barriers are really about. And so if we think about something, for example, like childcare is nearly impossible to get, and it's very difficult to afford. And so if you're with a person who maybe is causing harm, but is also the person who provides childcare for you or drives you back and forth to work, then being with this person isn't necessarily a choice in the way that we would think about it. And so what we're talking about really are larger issues, systemic issues, where people are having individual impacts, doing the best they can with the circumstances that they're being faced with, but they don't really have choice in the way they were imagining it. They're doing the best they can with the circumstances at hand. And what's happening is people are responding to larger cultural issues in an individual way, And sometimes what we're doing, and I'm not saying us on this panel, but sometimes what we're doing is using those false choices as a way to blame them for the way that their lives look, which is really unfortunate.
That's really helpful. And I think, Sarah, I'm going to ask you to chime in here on the same question, because I think that language around impossible choices and impossible circumstances really helps us to understand what we're talking about, that people are facing situations where there really aren't choices. So again, Sarah, as we start to think about how these negative outcomes that we're seeing, and I think most people can agree that they can see the negative outcomes, but I think where a lot of people get stuck is understanding the drivers. Can you help us unpack how we draw the line back to systemic and individual biases in creating these negative outcomes that your clients are experiencing?
Sure. I think one of the ways in which I try to evaluate the effects of bias on any particular case is a combination of the facts of the individual situation and, for example, doing a series of very simple thought experiments like, what if this person were a man? How would that feel different in my mind? How would that change my expectations of how this would go, or even how I would advise that person who's my client about how to proceed with their case? Or if this person were white or Black, or a different demographic than they are, how would that change both my perception of them and my, more importantly, advice about their case? And that can be a really illuminating thought experiment to do, even in evaluating how we all are affected by our own biases, and unavoidably. In combination with that, though, it's important to talk about the combination of cases. We can use some of these statistics we've been talking about, and I would also use some of my the whole of my experiences. For example, one of the statistics that I am aware of is that in a contested custody matter, let me back up, it is often said that women are more likely than men to get primary custody in a custody case between a man and a woman. Although that is true, if you were to only look at contested custody cases, meaning cases that actually go before a judge, go to a trial or a hearing of some kind, men are more likely to actually get primary custody then. So in other words, if men actually fight for custody in front of a judge, they're more likely to win, to succeed there. But that's a story that's not often told, and I think it really goes to our tendency to disbelieve women, especially when it comes to issues of family violence and child abuse. I would also add that one example that sticks out to me that I see pretty routinely in my work is that women in particular who are immigrants in the United States, who are not US citizens, who oftentimes, if they are married, they rely on their spouse to provide either their sponsorship or an affidavit of support in order to, first of all, get them logistically to the United States, and then for their ability to remain. And also, sometimes there's an enhanced language barrier for my clients that their spouse does not have, so they rely on their spouse for all of the information that they have about the country where they now live, the legal system. And it is pretty clear at that point that they don't have another option. They don't even, in most cases, are not even aware of another option. And by the time they get to me, it's just because they happen to talk to somebody that knew to say, you can call someone. You might have another choice here. But consistently, when it comes to these folks, the average person, and I mean that in terms of when they interact with law enforcement or sometimes even judges or other kind of, I'm in the legal system, so professionals in the world who are trying to do their everyday jobs assume that everyone has the same access to the same information. So inevitably, this is where we come back to, they're going to be blamed. They're going to say, why would you stay? It's a classic question about domestic violence survivors. Why wouldn't you call this person? Why wouldn't you just take the kids and leave? But as Barbara said, it's not a choice. and it's certainly not an informed choice.
That's really helpful. Thank you for putting so much specificity around it. Because I think one of the things you just said that really jumped out is the assumptions that people make when they're interacting with people. The assumption about the access to information, access to resources, access to support. And I think as we talk about assumptions driving negative outcomes, Rashidah, you can help us understand how assumptions drive negative outcomes in terms of access to employment. So can you help us again? We're just trying to paint a picture here so that we can understand how the negative outcomes that a lot of the women and girls that you guys service at Europe, how those negative outcomes are really the result of bias, whether that be systemic bias or individual biases of people they encounter, rather than, or maybe in addition to sometimes the outcome being the result of a poor choice. Can you help us kind of illuminate that with a spotlight on employment?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I think something that Sarah touched on was something that really resonated with me and triggered what I want to highlight is when I think about systemic barriers, what came to mind was our DACA students who we serve, who the assumption is that everyone has access to opportunity and everyone can be served because they have the legal right to work in the United States. And when I think about our DACA students, the barriers that they face is the right to work in the United States and the right to be able to have access to education. So within that, there's a lot of extra work that has to go into making sure that those students are served in a way that they do have access to careers. And it's not an assumption like, oh, this student automatically can go to this corporate partner. You know, we have to make sure that their work authorization is in place, that it doesn't expire before they go on to internship. And with that comes a lot of education on both parts. We have to meet with families and understand what are the barriers that you're facing to getting these documents completed. Do we need to provide you with access to legal resources? Do we need to provide you with access to maybe a translator? So a lot of our students have parents who are not English speakers. So there's a language barrier that comes along with the systemic barrier of having to meet the demands of the policies that are in place for DACA students, or, you know, some of the previous policies. I think about a student who had to leave the program because she feared during the Trump era, when the policies changed and, you know, there was a hold on DACA, she feared her safety. She feared for her ability to travel and come to a program, and she stopped coming. She had to remove herself from the program because of this policy, this systemic barrier that no longer said that her ID was valid. And this prevented her from being able to become a positive outcome, and she no longer returned. So I think when I think about systemic barriers, that's one of the things that comes to my mind. And I'm tearing up because I stay in contact with this young lady and we talk often, and we check on each other, and I check on her. And, I talk about, when she left the program and what she's doing now and how that has impacted her ability even now to gain access to other opportunities. So systemic barriers are very real, and the assumption that it doesn't impact everyone, or that they impact everyone the same way, is an assumption that we have to break that bias, right? Because everyone doesn't have the legal right to access education, to access careers, just by showing up and saying, hey, I want it. Sometimes it's not possible. And how do we address that?
Thank you, guys. This is very helpful because I think for a lot of us, we are so many steps removed from the situation that we don't necessarily understand sort of the details and the nuance. And I think it helps to make it real for us. So thank you guys for taking the time to sort of open this up. Before we turn the page, I want to talk a little bit about how COVID, sort of the obvious thing that has affected all of us for the past few years, how that has perhaps exacerbated existing issues you've already seen with the problem with biases and assumptions that people are making and the systemic barriers that your women and children are facing. And again, we're going to talk later about how your services affect them. But right now, I just want to talk about sort of before they get to you. Have you seen ways in which all of these different issues we've been talking about have actually been exacerbated by COVID? I'm going to open that up for anyone who wants to jump in, where you've seen that as people have come to your organization, that you've seen how COVID has specifically exacerbated the impact of these biases.
Yeah, I'd love to hop in there if I can.
Yeah.
COVID has impacted everything for the students that we serve, particularly the young women. Again, if I go back to like the access to childcare, COVID stopped childcare. In many instances, parents had to stop, had to keep their children home, and childcare services were not open, which means, a mom could not necessarily go to work in the same way, had to rearrange schedules. Some had to stop working. So we had a lot of young women showing up saying, either I have my children home, or I'm no longer working and now I can't provide for my children in the same way. Additionally, just in regards to transportation, if you can't, go to work, sometimes you can't ride the MARTers, you can't put gas in your car. We saw a ripple effect of the impacts of COVID, not just in regards to being able to access education opportunity, but just being able to meet the demands of everyday life. We have more students needing access to our food pantry, and more students needing access to Uber credits, more students needing just access to everything so that they could just, in essence, get to program, get to internship, and continue to thrive while in program and become a positive outcome. So it has tremendously impacted our students, as well as helped educate us on how to better serve students in a pandemic. For when the pandemic is over, we have now all these new resources and tools and techniques to utilize for the clients that we serve.
That's great that you were able to pivot and figure out ways to change the way that you meet those needs. So thank you. Would anyone else like to jump in on that before I turn the page and talk about it?
I will. I'll say that we had a lot of the same challenges that Rashidah describes at Europe. I think initially, though, the biggest challenge was just the access. I mean, many survivors could not even get to the phone or get away from the house to reach out for services because the batterer or the person who was causing harm was right there present, making it so that they couldn't ask anybody for help or for resources. So that was really one of the biggest challenges initially. And so what we were finding is that there was more input from law enforcement and from medical health providers because the situation would become really extreme in that way. That was the way that survivors were able to reach out to get assistance. So, access to support was a really big issue at the very beginning. And then again, following up on Rashidah's point, access to childcare, transportation, those were also big challenges. And then, thinking more about a number of things in terms of the services that we offer for survivors, being able to reach out and connect with someone who can kind of mirror back to you your strengths, remind you that this is a difficult time for everybody. I'm going to be able to find my way through this. I think that's what people really needed. And so we were also able to do some pivoting so that people could really kind of get in front of someone once they were able to access resources to say, this is hard for everybody. Here are some ways that we can offer you some support. So, support groups, opportunities for meditation, fitness, exercise, or things that can kind of help people connect to their well-being in spite of everything that was happening with the pandemic were some things that we were trying to do to help people kind of manage some of the difficulties going through that. Yeah.
And I think for us here at the Drake House, the isolation that our clients experienced during this time created or exacerbated some of their mental health challenges. And the way that we addressed bringing our families together before through our life skills in-person monthly, weekly life skills classes wasn't available to them. So, we went to virtual, as is most of you on the phone did a lot of virtual programming, and that just the human contact and the ability to socialize and network was a real challenge for our families on campus. We did pivot in our career services area, and we were able to get a lot of the at-home jobs, at-home employment opportunities, and to get some training in. So that was a good thing that came out as a result of COVID. But we did have a lot of mental health challenges, even with our children, for being isolated from their peer groups.
Thank you. Thank you for helping us illuminate how you took what was already a difficult situation and figure out ways to really meet the needs. So thank you for that. What I'd love to do is turn the page and talk a little bit about how biases actually affect your ability to implement your services and to create the intended impact that your organizations desire. So again, we've now set up how biases have affected the women and girls you serve and how it's driven them to need your services. Now I want to understand and tease out a little bit more how even once they get to you, bias can still affect your ability to actually help them in the way that you would like to. So if anyone, I'm going to again open that up for anyone who would like to jump in, but I think in these specific areas, particularly of intersection with the legal system, with housing, with employment, I think it's interesting for us to really start to get our heads around how even with all the resources that you have and even with the strategies that you have, that bias still creates a barrier, and help us understand how it creates that barrier and perhaps some strategies for breaking through it. Anyone want to jump in there?
Yeah, one thing that I'll add is that during the pandemic, the courts were closed here in DeKalb County. And so one of the challenges was for people to be able to figure out how to get a temporary protective order using technology. And that's not accessible for everyone. So being able to, know how to use the internet, have access to the internet, and even beyond the protective order piece, many things that people had to do. They needed to be able to have printers, internet access for school, for documentation, all kinds of things. And it was really difficult for many people. Housing applications, and the library was closed as well. And so that's one of the places where people might go to get internet access, and that was difficult. And so one of the things that we were able to do at the Women's Resource Center was help people get internet access, also help people get laptops and printers, things that they could use so that they could have at least some opportunity to interact with other people and get the things done that they needed to get done with just this really basic service, internet access.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you highlighted the technology disparity, because especially during the pandemic, that was something that really surfaced for the population that we serve, and how we serve them had to change. And with that, we realized that there was a increase in those young adults not having access to technology. So we had a lot of young adults who didn't have computers at home. And this was something new for us because now we're working remotely, we're doing program remotely. We pivoted from in-person, whereas before we would have computers on campus, things of that nature. And we saw an increase of students who did not have access to computers, and given that libraries and things of that nature were closed, we had to figure out ways. So we started a loaner laptop program, making sure that every young adult who came to our program had access to a computer if they needed one. We got more portable Wi-Fi, things of that nature. Again, the bias is that the assumption is that everyone has access to technology because we're in 2022, and that's not the case. We know a lot of the communities that we serve, the technology disparity is something that's still very real. And having Wi-Fi in the home is something that is not accessible to everyone. And so figuring out how to navigate that space, as well as be mindful of resources and the availability of resources. So partnering with different organizations, different corporate partners who have access to technology that we can use has been very helpful, as well as using, funding from grants such as AWF to make sure that we have these resources in place for our students when necessary.
That's really helpful. Would anyone else like to jump in to help us understand how the effects of bias have made it actually more difficult for you to implement the solutions that you're trying to implement?
One of the things that we're trying to do, Julie, is to ensure that our residents are earning a living wage. We have single mothers in our program, and of course, there is not a two-parent income here. So we are looking to transition families, and we have to ensure that they're earning a living wage so they can pay 3 times the rent or acquire home ownership. And as we are reaching out and talking to the community, we find that there are some biases about our clients' ability to get to a living wage job based on their education or their background. And I think that one of the important things that we're doing with the support of AFW is we are creating opportunities for our families to gain and stack credentials so that they can earn living wage jobs. For instance, if we're working with a person in the tech field, we work with them first and get them certified in help desk. And then we may graduate to a cybersecurity certificate or front end, back end certificate so that our families can make their way closer to earning a living wage. But I think the general consensus is that, when we call upon people before we start talking to them or educating them, is that we have some $15 an hour jobs. Well, $15 an hour jobs that's $31,000 a year, $31,200 a year. And our residents could only afford to pay $780 in rent. And I'm not sure that I know of a place that the rent is $780. And so I think that, our families they have a circumstance of homelessness. It is part of their journey, but it's certainly not their destination.
Thank you. Well, thank you guys. I'm keeping my eye on the time and on the Q&A. Just a reminder to everyone listening, if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A. We're going to turn the page to talk about some of your specific questions in a minute. But before we do that, guys, I would love to hear a little bit more about how AWF's, not only their funding, but also their strategic support has been instrumental in helping you to break these biases and break these barriers, not only because of the pandemic, but because of things that have been systemic that you've been working through for years, even pre-COVID. If a couple of you could just jump in and help us understand that, and then we'll turn the page to the questions from the audience.
I think to start with, what's been so powerful about AWF, just your existence and also your grant making priorities, is just even identifying that this is something that's valuable to talk about and pay attention to. The needs of women and girls and equality for women and girls and breaking barriers and biases for women and girls. I think that's an important place. And I think that's important modeling for other people who provide grants and also for people who are providing services for women and girls, to say that the work that you're doing really matters and it's important for women and girls' lives. And then being able to have that support and that flexibility so that we can meet the individual needs of the people that we're serving, without feeling like we have to apologize for that or have to, pretend that the problems don't exist, because we're working with a grantor that really understands, has a good lens about what the problems are. And so some of the things that have been really helpful for us in terms of working with AWF are being able to provide services that meet the needs of women and girls in real time. And so some of the things that we've been talking about, being able to provide assistance with transportation, provide assistance with childcare, also be able to provide creative ways to help people earn income if those traditional options are not necessarily immediately available. And so I give this example of a couple of years ago. There was a woman that prepared food for people, and we were able to buy her the supplies that she needed for her small catering business. And so those kinds of initiatives are really helpful to let people know that the needs of women and girls do matter and that they are valuable. I think is probably the most important thing that AWF is really doing, just bringing it to the forefront.
Thank you. Could anyone else jump in on this one before we turn to our questions from the audience?
I would love to jump in. Oh.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, I would love to jump in. So from a year perspective, we've received annual grant funding from AWF since 2017. Thank you so very much. And beyond supporting our female identifying students, the grants are not restricted to a particular program area. And this is so very helpful because the dynamics of our program require that we are able to meet a dynamic range of program needs and student needs. We are currently in our 4th year of AWF funding through the Women's Pathway to Success Grant Program, where we're one of 10 nonprofits. We're receiving $50,000 in funding each year to support economic self-sufficiency for women, and funding helps our student services department, which I have not highlighted. We call them our student services superheroes. They're a team of social workers who really, really provide those wraparound services. So that grant funding really helps us provide those wraparound services: childcare, rental assistance, transportation support, car maintenance, professional attire. These long-term benefits of these short-term support right here allows year participants with the support and funding to really finish the program. The long-term benefits is that these students, when they graduate, become alumni, they increase their wage earnings, and they're able to support their families long-term, and not from a job perspective, but from a meaningful career, impactful perspective, where they're able to continue with their education, continue to get those stackable credentials, and continue to provide pathways for others. And we say, continue to the movement of Year Up and bring others with them as they continue to climb. So AWS funding has been instrumental in our ability to continue to provide meaningful careers and close the opportunity divide from an educational and an economic standpoint.
Well,
Thank you.
Rashidah, no, I'm sorry, Julie. Rashidah, I want to piggyback on what you said, because AWF is also providing us those kind of resources so that we can continue our work with clients and educating them and building marketable skill sets so that they can earn living wage jobs. And really, some of the things that we talked about today, that there's a lack of understanding that many of our families didn't have resources that traditional families had. And we all know that finances bring those resources. So career jobs bring benefits, health and dental benefits, and most likely mental health coverage and all of those things. And I don't think that any one of the families that we're working with or you guys are working with would choose to be impoverished. And so I don't think that they would choose to be born to a parent who is an alcoholic who has abused them, and then they choose a mate that also abuses them. This is generational issues that we need to address that could all be addressed by having the appropriate resources. So what AWF does for us is they are providing us with opportunities to engage in those career networking opportunities, skills building opportunities, and educational opportunities so that we can make sure that the next generation is having those resources because the finances are available for them to do so.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Sarah, did you want to chime in?
I will, yeah, mainly just to echo especially what Rashidah was saying about the what's really wonderful about the resources provided by AWF in particular is that they are not strictly limited to a certain case type in our work or a certain specific demographic, which really recognizes the wide range of needs and services that we might be able to provide to our clients. All of our clients, one of the things they all have in common is that they have all experienced some form of trauma in their lives. And that can have very long-term effects in such a wide range of areas, not only in terms of their mental health, as Cheryl was saying, but also even in terms of physical health. People who've experienced trauma are much more likely to have addiction, to experience early death from heart disease, and even higher rates of cancer. So when I say that our clients need a very wide range of things, I mean that, and AWF helps make that possible so that we can try to reduce the effects of trauma and the effects of poverty for our clients.
That's great. Thank you guys so much. And I know AWF has been so instrumental in supporting you guys, not only financially, but strategically. And what I want to do now is, we only have a few minutes before we wrap up. And I know before I said AWF, I was going to have you guys chime in to pick out the questions, but if you don't mind, I'm just going to keep rolling in the interest of time, because I want to piggyback on what Sarah just said. And we have a question in the Q&A box around mental health. So I'd love it if maybe just one or two of you could just talk a little bit more about this issue, because I think a lot of people recognize that not only from trauma, but even just from the ongoing stress of a lot of the situations that the women and girls that you serve find themselves in, that mental health becomes a real critical issue, but oftentimes it's one that's swept under the rug. So again, in the interest of time, if maybe just one or two of you could pop in and tell us a little bit more about how you're seeing the effects of mental health challenges and what you're able to do to help to minimize those impacts.
Yeah. We are seeing a lot of anxiety and depression. And I think one of the things that's really challenging is that we don't have a lot of permission to be with our feelings as they are. Everyone is expected to just kind of suck it up and keep going. That's especially true for people who have low resources, because you don't have permission to slow down. And so we work with therapists. We're thankful that we have the support of AWF to be able to provide therapy services. And then we also work with people individually so that they can learn to be with their feelings as they are. So be able to respond to some of those ACEs that Sarah talked about. I think recognizing that trauma is something that happens over generations and over time, that complex trauma can impact how we show up in our day-to-day lives. And then as we're helping people be with this trauma, reminding them that it's not their fault and that that adversity is not destiny, so that there are some ways that they can practice some really important skills that can really help them kind of slow down, be in their bodies, advocate for themselves, own their feelings without apology, without shame, without blame. So some of how we do that again are things like regular yoga here. We do meditation groups. We have a sister circle, the sisters group, that survivors in service to extend resiliency, and also sistership. So we pair women together in a mentoring sistership kind of relationship so that you can have a person who's in front of you, who can kind of mirror back your best strengths, who can remind you about who you are, who can help you see your life beyond what your circumstances have been, and let you know again that adversity is not destiny, that you deserve to be with your feelings and that you have the right to health and wellness and that you can prioritize that.
Yeah. I love that you say adversity is not destiny, because that echoes our sentiment at Year Up. We also have a culture of wellness. One of the things that has shown up in the population that we serve is this transgenerational trauma. I'm a social worker also, and I didn't highlight that. So I speak from a trauma-informed perspective, and just from a social work perspective when seeing our students and the impacts of trauma. And with that, the funding from AWF has allowed us to provide additional resources around counseling. We do have therapeutic services for students, whether on one-on-one. We have a women's group called Teach, Empower, and Advocacy. And our women, identifying women, are able to show up in that space with their whole selves in a safe space, a brave space, because we know safety and bravery looks different to people, and able to really acknowledge, those mental health concerns, or just those concerns that they're embodying, and what that looks like and how that shows up in program. Because we've seen when these things are not addressed, it also impacts how they show up to work, right? It also impacts how they show up in the world. And self-awareness is something that we want our young women to be aware of. We don't want them to hold on to the bias of the angry woman, or in dealing with women of color, the angry Black woman, right? We don't want them to show up in a space where people say, oh, you're angry today, and it's really like, no, I haven't been able to solidify this thing for my kid, or I didn't show up to this thing I needed to be to today because I had to work, or I'm just not in the right headspace, right? So how can we get them first to acknowledge something is wrong? I'm not showing up my best self today. And how can we be of support to them in those moments, so that things don't carry on? So we've really been mindful, intentional about creating space, having conversations that say, hey, we say, don't suffer in silence, right? Our students hear that a lot. Don't suffer in silence, don't suffer in silence. And trust the process. Trust that someone's gonna show up for you if you let us know that something is happening. And we always say, I see you. When students show up, we see that something is wrong, even when you're showing up with everything put together, right? We see you. And students need to hear that we see them. Our young adults, our young women in particular, need to hear that we see you, so that when they feel unseen, they know Mrs. Jones sees me, or this other coach sees me, and I can go to her and say, I'm not feeling well, something is not right. How can you guys help me today? So.
Thank you, guys. Just in the interest of time, I'm just going to kick in one more quick question. And I think it's something that everybody is thinking about right now, and that's inflation. And so I think it would be helpful, again, if one or two people can just quickly chime in. We only have a couple of minutes left, to help us understand how inflation is not only negatively impacting the lives of the women and girls you serve, but also your ability to serve them. So again, if maybe just one, probably we have 1 minute, one person can chime in about inflation, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
I mean, the very simplest of things is the cost of housing, the apartment rents, and the cost of gas for transportation for people to get back and forth. They are having major impacts when you have limited resources and a limited budget to work with.
So what can be done? Can anybody leave us with some hope or some answers or one idea before we wrap up? Because we're
doing some really creative solutions around, like, that hustle culture. So not that we want to advance capitalism, but we want to let women know that there's a place for them at the table. You can be creative and earn money on the side. So you can do this thing that you do 9 to 5 or 11 to 7, but you can also do this other thing that's your special thing that you do and earn a little extra money, because everything costs more. So other creative solutions are kind of, share the load together. We're encouraging women to do that as well.
Yeah, access, continue to open doors, kick in doors, open windows, pull up seats to tables, and remind women that you can, because you can, not because you're a woman, but because you can, because you choose to, and because you have all the resources first within you and all the power within you, and then everything else that you don't have, you have a support network. Those people around you, those folks that are on this call today, on the Zoom, your community. The tribe is what I call, tap into your tribe.
And I think we can all communicate with each other about the realities that we're experiencing, but also when we learn about support networks, when we learn about resources, when we communicate with each other as women about, our salaries, everybody rises when we
Wins.
learn about those things.
And I think it's a matter of helping our residents with their executive functioning, how to plan and prioritize and organize and share with their neighbors. So really it's going to be beneficial long-term that they develop these healthy habits moving forward, and then they can weather these tough situations.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much. We're just over the top of the hour, so I'm going to kick it back to Ali at AWF, but thank you so much. I'm honored to be in your presence, and I'm so inspired by the work that you do. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today for this important conversation. And for everyone who joined us, we will be posting this recording of this webinar up to our website on our Women's History Month page at atlantawomen.org. And another way that you can help is by attending our upcoming event, All Women Forward, April 28th. So check that out on our website as well. We'd love to see you there. So everyone have a great day, and we hope to see you at one of our events very soon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.